Resident Evil 7 is a mostly excellent addition to the Resident Evil franchise. It brought proceedings into first person for the first time in a mainline entry and introduced a brand new setting and set of characters, while also managing to stay true to its roots by borrowing from previous titles in the series, and I fancy having a little chat about that. Resident Evil 7 made its debut at 2016's E3, accompanied by the shock announcement that the beginning hour demo was to be made available on the PlayStation Network that very same day. To many, myself included, that demo felt heavily influenced by the success of Silent Hill's teaser PT, released 2 years prior, with a dash of the Blair Witch Project here and a hint of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre there thrown in for good measure. Although Resident Evil 7 did turn out to be a fairly different experience from PT once it hit store shelves in 2017, it was still clearly a title inspired by other video games and movies, something which becomes very apparent in its opening few minutes alone. Ethan arrives in Louisiana driving a car that is clearly an homage to the Evil Dead and the vehicle Ash Williams drove. The fate of Andre Stickland shortly after during the first videotape sequence is very similarly framed to that of Mike in the Blair Witch Project. The premise of that tape in particular mirrors the story of Capcom's NES horror role-playing game Sweet Home, and finally, the scene at the baker's dinner table has the Texas Chainsaw Massacre written all over it. Those are just a few of the many examples on offer, and I could spend hours talking about the different ways Resident Evil 7 references both cinema and video games, but on this occasion we're going to put cinema to one side and focus entirely on how it borrows from games, or more specifically, how it borrows from the Resident Evil series itself. There are plenty of inclusions which fans of the series won't have been surprised to see make a return, many of which are shared across multiple titles. For example, herbs, a healing item and series staple, once again litter environments, with the stronger first aid sprays appearing in spirit in the form of bottles of first aid meds. The inventory utilised features a similar but more modern design to that of older titles, and save rooms accompanied by a musical theme also make a return, as does the item box mechanic, which allows you to access everything you've collected no matter where you are. Then there are callbacks to specific entries in the series. There's a cop who meets a grisly end towards the game's beginning, much like in Resident Evil 2. Jack Baker smashes through a wall as he pursues you, a nod perhaps to Mr. X. A fight against Jack, who wields a chainsaw-like weapon, brings to mind 4's Dr. Salvador. There are notes you can find referencing Alyssa Ashcroft and Clive R. O'Brien, who featured in Outbreak and Revelations respectively, and the game even offers you the choice between two branching paths like 3 so often did, even if the outcome doesn't significantly change things in the long run. Even the ending has its own references, and there will be spoilers for that in 3, 2, 1, with a weapon named the Albert 01 thrown from a helicopter used to defeat the final boss. We've definitely both heard that name and witnessed that scene before. Much like the references to different movies I discussed earlier, this is by no means an exhaustive list, but it does at least give you some idea of how much reverence Capcom and 7's development team had for the older Resident Evil titles, despite 7 itself being perhaps the biggest departure for the series since 4 in terms of style. The references, callbacks, and the inclusion of certain mechanics are all handled really well, in that they allow the game to feel better connected to the series as a whole, which is so important given how different a look and feel it so often has. But there are a couple of games that 7 borrows more from than any others in the series, and it's when comparing it with those two that I think things begin to get really interesting. As mentioned previously, tonally the game is inspired by a number of different sources, but the Baker residence itself, and to a degree the structure of the game, especially during its first half, feel like they were heavily influenced by the first Resident Evil, and on occasion its remake. The best place to begin examining this further is with the Baker Ranch's main house. The first semi-open area you are given the opportunity to explore once the hour or so long introduction has concluded. It feels strikingly similar to the Spencer Mansion we first got to grips with back in 1996, even if stylistically the two sport drastically different aesthetics. The main hall of the house is a fantastic example, and it's here where the connections between the three games begin to become more obvious. Beginning with the smaller details, if you attempt to open the front door of the Spencer Mansion in Resident Evil's remake, 3 dogs will break into the main hall, and if you examine the front door of the Baker house, you'll likely notice that 3 dog heads are required to exit the area, a clear reference to the number of zombified pooches who attack you in the remake. A picture of the Arklay Mountains also hangs on a wall in the house's main hall, a nod to the area where the Spencer Mansion was located. Nearby, a shotgun puzzle even awaits. It's not in the same place it's found during the original Resident Evil, but given both puzzles involve using a broken shotgun to obtain a working one, that's clearly what it's been inspired by. When it comes to the actual layout of the Baker house, the comparisons to Resident Evil continue. Both the house and the mansion's main halls feature dual staircases leading up to a second floor, with additional hallways to explore on either side. Both have doors which are unlocked by themed keys, in 7 by the scorpion, snake and crow keys, and in Resident Evil by the armor, sword, helmet and shield keys. And once more doors have been unlocked and you're able to explore both areas to their fullest, there's even more similarities to spot. Both have basements you're forced to explore, each has a dining room in its west wing, the east wings share drawing rooms, and both sides of both locations house a save room. There's even a bathtub full of questionable liquid you're forced to drain, and a puzzle involving a clock in each. Given how much is shared between the two, I don't think all this can be chalked up to coincidence. 7's development team clearly looked to the past when designing the Baker residence, and I like to think its unusual design is something they wanted you to take notice of. Ethan himself draws attention to it after solving the first shadow puzzle.
Who builds this shit?
And the game actually answers that very question a little later on. A note found in the attic makes who built it about as abundantly clear as possible without spelling it out. It says that in 1992, a company named Trevor and Chamberlain Construction were hired by Jack to build a shadow-activated doorway in the resident's main hall. Given that a certain George Trevor also built the Spencer Mansion, I think the observant will likely make the connection here if the wealth of other similarities hadn't already been enough. In terms of the path of progression through 7, up until the game's midpoint at least, it also feels like it mirrors Resident Evil. You explore the house while slowly unlocking more and more areas until you finally have what you need to escape. You're then taken on a detour to the old house, a side area with a particular focus on bugs, before heading back to the house to tidy up any loose ends ahead of the game entering its second half. Likewise, in Resident Evil, you begin by exploring the Spencer Mansion, uncovering its secrets and gaining access to new areas. That's followed by a trip to the guardhouse, another area featuring a lot of bugs, before you find yourself back in the Spencer Mansion prior to leaving it for good and heading into the mines. It's also worth noting that both titles do include a section set in mines, although these come at different points in the game, and the setting itself is really the only similarity between them. What's so fantastic about the way 7 borrows from the original Resident Evil in terms of the layout of certain areas and the way progression is structured is that it helps the game strike a wonderful balance between feeling fresh and familiar in equal measure. The key-based progression system through the Baker residence and the layout of the area as a whole do a great deal to make series veterans feel at home without things ever becoming too overbearing. The movement between different locations mirroring the first game to a certain degree was also a wise decision on Capcom's part, as it's already proven to work brilliantly. At the same time, the switch to first person, increased movement options and the expansion of many other mechanics also ensured the experience felt fresh, even if the underlying structure hadn't changed too much from the original Resident Evil. To me, 7 not only feels like a love letter to the series' older titles, the first in particular, but also like Capcom proving a point. That point being that even if games have become far slicker products over the last 26 years or so, the foundations which helped make the series such a resounding success to begin with are still just as amazing today as they were back in 1996. You may have noticed that I've mentioned 7's first half a lot so far, and that's with good reason, because while the art of borrowing is something Capcom in my view absolutely nailed during the game's opening hours, its second half uses a decidedly different approach, and it's here where 7 begins to fall apart a little. I'm not going to go into great lengths about why the game's second half is so much weaker, but there are some glaring issues. The lack of enemy variety begins to become noticeable, which isn't helped by a switch to environments which not only also lack variety, but are far less memorable as well. There's also much more of a reliance on combat as opposed to exploration, making it feel very different from what you may have become accustomed to, and perhaps worst of all, it absolutely destroys any sense of pacing 7 had done so brilliantly to maintain up until that point. 7's first half always kept you on the move, shepherding you between different areas or parts of the house at a fairly quick pace. Combined with the familiar layout of the residence, similarity in overall structure, and references to older titles, it felt comfortable in the best way possible and remained as engaging an experience as ever as you slowly built up your stock of ammo and items as you unlocked new areas or figured out the solution to puzzles you'd already come across but didn't yet have the means to solve. But where the original Resident Evil then continued to follow a similar structure all the way through to its conclusion, keeping you in the shoes of Jill Valentine or Chris Redfield at all times, 7 abruptly shoves that all to one side. The drumbeat of progression, of moving from place to place, of acclimatizing to Ethan as a character, of building up his stockpile, is suddenly ripped away from you, replaced by an entirely different character who begins things from scratch. Because the game's first half has such a quick but consistent pace, it feels incredibly jarring, and it happens right at the point where I'd guess many had really bedded into the Resident Evil 7 experience and were having a great time with its gameplay loop. If the first half of the game proves that the Resident Evil fundamentals still work as amazingly well today as they ever did, then 7's second half proves that moving too far away from them is a mistake if not handled with great care. Its first half is an excellent example of how a game can borrow from its predecessors and still feel decidedly fresh, while its second is without doubt a more unique experience, but one which also suffers due to its linearity. What this all ultimately means is that Resident Evil 7 feels like a somewhat inconsistent experience. A first half chock full of references to other games in the series, some more subtle than others, combines wonderfully with its structure as a whole in terms of both progression and the layout of areas to create an experience that expertly toes the line between feeling like something new and exciting and something old and familiar. It takes a formula the series moved away from for 3 mainline games and reinvigorates it with a degree of class I'd guess many wouldn't have expected given the game's perspective was such a radical departure. A weak second half which moves away from established conventions does let the experience down as a whole somewhat, but nevertheless, if you've ever been a fan of the series, it's a game you absolutely have to play, if only for its fantastic first half. It may be a bit of an up and down experience, a tale of two halves, but when it comes to the art of borrowing, Resident Evil 7 does it brilliantly. Cheers for watching the video, boys, girls and moulded. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, do consider subscribing to the channel as there's plenty more where that came from, and do let me know your thoughts, and hopefully I'll see you all again soon.